Hey guys, Steven from KR Motorsports again. Just wanted to make another video. We're starting a new series called How to Turbocharge Your Not Common Car. So, as the video series, and the name is very tentative, it's exactly how it sounds. We're going to be doing something that I get a lot of calls for. And what that is that you've got your normal, or not your normal, but your not normal everyday tuner car. So I can't tell you how many guys I get that will call about a car that is not really supported as far as the aftermarket goes. And there's a number of reasons. It could be, the car was given to them by a friend or a family member or someone who passed on. There's sentimental value behind it. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of cars out there. People like a lot of weird things. Over the years, I've helped do a lot of weird conversions over the years, things that just cars that weren't super popular. I've done a 3rd gen Eclipse with an Evo head swap. I've actually even helped someone do a riding lawnmower carb to EFI conversion. So I've done a lot of weird things, and a lot of shops shy away from that, which I understand, because there's a lot of hurdles that people don't see or understand, that what it takes to converting a car from a naturally aspirated to a turbocharged car. So these videos we're not gonna go over the normal deal of building a turbo manifold and downpipe and turbo selection. We're going to focus on what I think is the most important. And that, as you can see, is going to be the ECU side of it. If you can't tune your car, no matter what mods you do to it, the car's never going to run right, and you're never going to have a good product, right? And that's the big thing that people need to understand. So in this series, we're going to be talking about, again, that side of it, the ECU side of it, and how awkward things can be, or how difficult things can be, and the routes that you can go. So if you have a very strange or not normal car that you want to turbocharge, the first step, like I said, is going to be the ECU. You need to kind of figure out what you want and what you don't want. And the thing is that a lot of ECUs on the market, on paper it looks good, but if you don't really know the technical side of it, what are you doing, right? You don't know what you're buying. You don't know if it's going to compatible, if it's going to work. So we're going to go through that. What you see before you is the DIYAutoTune MS3. So this is a Megasquirt ECU, which, that gets thrown around a lot, and it does get a bad rep. So Megasquirts started off as like a DIY ECU, meaning you bought components and a circuit board, and you built it, and you wired it up yourself. And over the years, I can't tell you how many bad builds I've dealt with. DIYAutoTune came around and changed all that. I've had so much good customer support with those guys, and I love their ECUs. And so on a lot of weird projects, this is kind of where we end up at. As you know from my other videos, the ECU Masters EMU is probably my favorite ECU as far as functionality goes. But when you're doing a car that does not have a ton of aftermarket support, the EMU is probably not a really good fix for that. Here's the reason why. It comes down to your trigger system. We'll have a whole video based on trigger systems at a later date. But basically, it really comes down to, is your trigger system, which is like your car's brain waves, if you will, are those calibrated? Are there tables for that? And the ECU Masters is not as flexible in that than the DIY Megasquirt ECU. So we'll dive into that here in a sec. But firstly, let's talk about the ECU. This is an MS3. The MS3, there is an upgraded version of the MS3, which is called the MS3X. Now, the cool thing about this ECU, the MS3 here, is that you can actually upgrade to an MS3X at a later date if you choose to. And we'll go over that in a second about the differences between the two and why you may want to upgrade and why not, whatever. So first and foremost, this is the ECU. For scale, and because I'm a Texan, we're going to scale it up to a already opened Dr. Pepper can. So as you can see from a profile side, it's actually pretty thin, right? It is kind of an awkward spot. It is kind of fat, but overall it's actually pretty easy to hide. So it's an aluminum enclosure, which is actually really nice. And if you look here, this is the main harness for the the MS3. If you buy the MS3X upgrade, it goes along here and you'll have another connector like so. Okay, this little guy down here is your map sensor. It's got an onboard map sensor. For those who don't know, hopefully you guys do know, but for those who don't know, this is actually how we read air, vacuum, and boost through the motor. On the opposing side, we have an SD slot here. This SD side is actually for data logging. You can plug this guy in and it'll just do data logs. And once the card fills up, it'll actually erase the older ones and then go back through it. So this is actually really useful, especially if you're doing a very uncommon setup. We have this here. This is the DB9. So excuse me, is this a DB9? Yes, so this is the DB9 serial to USB. It does not come with the ECU. You actually have to buy this. DIYAutoTune actually sells this as well. But yeah, so you definitely need this. Alternatively, as you can see, we have the USB-B, which is, I believe it's a USB-B, but it's a printer USB. So either one will work. I just do a lot of Megasquirt ECU, so I just happen to have this, so I just wanted to show it. This right here is an options connector, so you can add in additional things through here quickly if need be. Wideband OT is probably one of them, right off the top of my head, boost controller and whatnot. And it does come with that. It is not pre-wired though, but it does come with it. Okay, so there's that. Now, putting this aside, you can purchase their optional harness. This is their 8-foot harness, I believe. So this is the longer of the two. Again, you can also purchase this for the MS3X upgrade as well. So, and as you can see, it's clearly says MS3. Now, people see wiring and they get scared, and you should be, because you can really screw it up and it can be really, really expensive. But this harness actually makes things a lot easier. Obviously, it's pre-pinned and you've already got things like this. So this wire here is shielded. This is for your cam and crank wire. It's already shielded for you. So shielding wire, I can wire up. I definitely hate dealing with shielded wire. So I can do it, but not a huge fan. But as you can see, this is already pre-done for us. Now, it also gives us a handy dandy generic wiring harness schematic. So let's open that up here. So looking at this, you can see that the schematic, and this schematic, by the way, is readily available online. Like, I know it's not a very good way of looking at this, but you can definitely look at this. So for instance, if you're doing like a carb to EFI conversion, this is what you would be looking at, okay? So you've got your fuel pump relay here, you got main relay here, and if your car already is EFI'd and you've already have this stuff, then you can repurpose it, and we'll get to that also later. Now, the interesting thing about the MS3 here is that it can actually use a narrowband OT. Definitely not recommended for a boosted application, but if you've got like a naturally aspirated NA or naturally aspirated carb to EFI conversion, this will work okay. Especially, you know, it's only going to be used for idle and cruising. Wide open throttle is definitely not going to work here. We've got the coolant temp and air temp, so you can configure these to however you want, and that's done in the software. Meaning that you can use the ones that you've got on the car already, or you can use the GM stuff, which is obviously ready available. Then we've got these guys. This is part of the trigger system. This is the crank position sensor. You can see that it's the shielded wires, but that's basically it in a nutshell. While this does look really confusing, if you stare at it long enough, it'll actually start to make sense. Okay, and so let's talk about that for a second here. We've got our injectors here, right? You can see that each injector has its own signal wire, but all these red wires are actually shared. Well, not always shared, but it's usually shared. See? So it's actually not really as hard as people think, especially when you have this harness. I do recommend people looking at their factory ECU and seeing if you can purchase like a patch harness or basically an extension harness. And that's what I do with the EMUs. I buy an extension harness and I chop one end of it, and then I hook up the EMU side of it. So when I'm doing like any weird install, that's generally the way to do it. And that makes things a lot easier for you to troubleshoot as well. And especially if it's like your only car. So for instance, you know, you can I also recommend keeping the car mechanically all stock until this is all figured out. So that way, you know, if you have an issue, you can always easily swap back to the stock ECU and then troubleshoot it, okay? So the thing is that standalone ECUs are somewhat universal. They technically are always universal so long as the software side is figured out. But, you know, you get a lot of these newer cars that are drive-by-wire and CAN bus. This ECU is not going to do it. This ECU is really going to be designed for like anything that's like sub maybe 2000-ish era and anything prior to that, right? So we're not talking about direct injection, we're not talking about drive-by-wire, we're not talking about CAN bus stuff, okay? This is just your plain Jane normal, like for the Honda guys, like the OBD1, OBD2 style cars, you know, but nothing really newer than that. So that's that, all right? So moving on to this, we are actually hopefully going to be buying a roughly mid 2000s car that is drive-by-wire, that is CAN bus. And so yes, that goes against what I just said on what you should not do, right? So we're going to actually do this in what's called parallel mode, okay? Parallel mode is going to basically allow the stock ECU to handle certain functions while the standalone handles other functions, okay? Well, how do you do that? You actually do that by sharing sensors, okay? So what we're gonna do is on the injector side, we are actually going to clip the signal wires from the stock ECU and the Megasquirt will control them. When it comes to the cam and crank though, we're actually going to share those, okay? So instead of wiring